was led off on that and ended talking about change and renegotiation, or buyers making sure that they realise all of the benefits that AI has to offer in a environment that we are now, where these tools are advancing very, very quickly. And as Suresh quite rightly points out, there's rapid change in a short period of time, and that is something that we all, that are involved in negotiating and agreeing these sorts of arrangements need to bear in mind. So I on that specific point then around renegotiating, whether we're seeing people renegotiate terms that they've agreed because of the result of the change in technology. I think the answer, what I can say to that is yes, we are. Where we see it coming up, I think most often, is where there's an opportunity anyway to introduce a change before the natural expiry of the agreement. So I don't know, you've agreed a 3, 4, 5-year term, and there may be a change that is being made to the service anyway before the expiry of that 3, 5-year term. And it might be then that as a buyer, you have an opportunity to have that conversation with your service provider to say, well, look, what about all these other AI tools that we could bring to improve the service, and to have that conversation. Or I see it coming up at the end of the natural expiry of the agreement. So you're coming up towards the end of your 3, 4, 5-year term, and there is an opportunity then obviously to talk to your current service provider and say, look, I could go out to the market, and I know that lots of service providers will bring an array of AI tools and capability to enhance the services that they'll deliver to me, and that will have an impact on the commercials. And what can you do to improve the service, transform it using these new tools that are on the market? And you can use it as part of that conversation about renewing a contract. So if it's I've seen agreements that are long-term contracts, in the sense that they maybe had a 5-year term, which is quite a long term, I think, by today's standards, and it may have been renewed for another 5-year term, or for a couple of shorter periods of time that cumulatively mean that you've got a 10-year contract end to end. And 10 years ago, of course, sort of looking back, 2016, 2015, that predates things like ChatGPT and the other general purpose AI models that hit the market. Microsoft launching Copilot, only a few years ago. Google's Gemini came onto the market at about the same time. So 10 years ago, in 2016, 15, 16, when you were contracting, I don't know, for service desk services or application maintenance and support services, that would have been a sort of heavily human powered service. And we know that those services now can be greatly enhanced by the use of AI technology. So what you would contract for now would be very different to what you did in 2015 and 16, both in terms of maybe the way that service is delivered, the technology that is used, and then obviously the pricing and the impact on the service levels. So we are seeing
Dan, just hold you 1 second. David's waving at us ferociously, and I'm not sure what that's for.
No, I was going to ask Dan, because I think there's a question that came in. I think it leads in nicely at this point around contractual terms, and if there's any sort of considerations that we need to have for those third-party tools that you just alluded to. Is there any sort of regard that we need to have in service delivery for the fact that these quite often depend on that third-party tool or AI use case? And is there something we need to keep in mind there? So I thought it was a nice segue to sort of bring that question in.
Yeah, and then let's keep all questions to the panel as well after that, please. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, bringing in any technology that relies on third-party tools, you'll need to make sure that your service agreement thinks about that, and that becomes important where we have many tools hitting the market which rely on a few core foundational models, and I'll touch on that in a second. Just to finish the thought on this piece around renegotiating your contract to introduce AI. I think from a buyer's point of view, if you are having that conversation about renewing, an agreement with a current provider and asking them to introduce AI tools, I think the important thing is to try and lock in those benefits at the time that you're awarding that contract extension. Now, it may be that the provider, ideally what you say is, you're going to introduce some AI tools and the pricing is going to be X and the service levels are going to be X, and that's all agreed. If there's a bit of a transformation that has to take place in order for the service provider to introduce those tools and to understand more the sorts of benefits that those tools can bring and how the service will be transformed, and therefore what the impact is going to be on commercials, on service levels, you may not be able to lock that in the way I've just said. But what you'll have to do then is make sure that you have a transformation plan with clear milestones, objectives, that your documents are set up so that once those changes happen, your service description is ready to go in the new world, and your new service levels are ready to go, and your new pricing is ready to go, or you've got a pricing model that is flexible enough to accommodate the change that will happen, and hopefully a reduction in the price that you're paying, on a monthly basis or whatever it may be. So locking all of that in as much as possible and retaining those levers that you can pull if it's not being delivered. So if transformation isn't happening in the way that you'd agreed, it's not being delivered on time, what mechanisms do you have in the contract to keep accountability? Because if the quid pro quo was, I'm going to extend the service with you, but that's on the basis you're going to deliver AI transformation, you need to make sure that both parties are holding up their end of the bargain. So just then to move on to, I think, a bit more about what David's just alluded to on third-party tooling. What we're also seeing in the market then is that many vendors or service providers who have their own AI tools, that those tools often rely on general purpose AI models that have been created by third parties. So, for example, OpenAI's GPT, Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, and then they build their own sort of user interface or workflow on the top of it. And that is, I think, primarily because it's easier for someone to leverage a general purpose AI model that's on the market already than create one, because it is an absolutely huge investment to create a general AI model, and there's lots of risk and infrastructure and things that you need to be able to do that. Some vendors will give their customers the option of either taking the supply of that underlying model through the vendor, or actually allowing the customer to put the AI tool onto the model that they may already have a contract with the applicable provider for. So it gives some flexibility to the customer, because you may, as a buyer, have a preferential model. You may have better commercials buying it directly from the provider of that model, and you may even have better contractual terms. So, but I think the watch out, and the point that we see coming up for negotiation and discussion is where the lines of responsibility lie. If your service provider is using one of these tools that relies on a third party model, is the amount of responsibility that the service provider will take for the performance of the underlying model. And for buyers, you just need to be careful about how you navigate this, so that you don't end up with what I call a responsibility vacuum. And that could happen where, for example, if you retain the model, if you use the model that you already have a contract for, and then you take a service from someone else and have a contract for that service, making sure that those two agreements work together, and that your service provider isn't overreaching when they say, look, I'm not going to take responsibility for the service if it's as a result of an issue with the underlying model. And I get the intent behind that, and I think you can't expect the service providers to take responsibility for how the model has been trained, its weighting and that technical performance. But there may be a service layer over the top of that, a quality assurance layer that may be human led from the service provider side that you're expecting. So, for example, if you're going to to a lawyer for contract review, and they're going to use an AI tool to do that review for you. And I don't know, it's picking out key terms that you need to think about. If for whatever reason the tool hallucinates or just doesn't pick up something, it's a bit inaccurate. Now, it could be an error in the way the tool was prompted, but it could be an error in the tool itself. Hallucination is a known issue with some of these models. Now, I think if I was the person receiving that output from my service provider who's used that tool, I would probably expect them to have checked and validated and done some sort of human look across to make sure that what it's saying is the output rings true. So, and you can apply that in other services, even, in something like an AI tool that is helping to triage service tickets. You would expect there to remain some responsibility of the service provider to keep that quality assurance, to make sure the tool is behaving as it should be, and you're meeting service levels and all those sorts of things. So that is just an area where I think we are commonly seeing, parties sort of just making sure that that is calibrated in the right way so that that balance is met. And so that's a bit of a watch out for buyers. And then one final point I think I wanted to make that's connected to that is about managing the kind of concentration risk that comes with the fact that many of these tools rely on the same general AI models. So it's a sort of wider governance issue, but it does relate to that contracting process. Because many vendors do rely on those same few models, if there's an issue with one of those underlying models, that can become a systemic risk for someone that is using tools that are all relying on the same model. And I think for buyers, it's important to understand where those underlying models are used in the tools that you're buying, and then just thinking about how you're diversifying and mitigating the risk of having sort of single points of failure that then cascade across your enterprise because you've got multiple AI tools all using the same model. And the way I see buyers that we work with managing that risk is both through kind of pre-contractual questionnaires that are going out to buyers, which might be a questionnaire. It could be a standalone questionnaire that asks about their AI tooling and the solutions that they're planning to bring, and will specifically ask them about whether it incorporates third-party models and what those models are. In the contract itself, I see buyers including in their standard AI terms and conditions some questions or warranties around the use of third-party foundation models to flush out that information at the point that you're contracting, if it hasn't already been picked up through your kind of due diligence questionnaire, the response that you get from a bidder as part of an RFP on their AI solutions. And so once you've got that information, buyers are starting to, I think, track. It may be part of a wider governance piece they're doing, tracking the overall use of AI in their enterprise. That could be their own AI tooling and then the AI tooling that they're buying in from third parties. But when you're tracking that, also tracking which of those tools rely on this core group of foundation models, so that then you can start to get an overall picture of your AI sort of landscape and where you may have concentration risks, and then think about how you mitigate and manage that. So that's it from me for now. Handing back to you, Kerry. Thank you very much.